You stopped defending them in your head around 4 months before you said anything out loud. It was small at first. They said something at dinner with your friends, and instead of laughing or adding to it, you just noticed it differently. Not with anger, just distance. And that distance, it didn't announce itself. It just moved in quietly and started rearranging things. Because here's what I've seen happen more times than you'd expect. The breakup doesn't begin with a fight. It doesn't start when someone cheats or lies, or does something so clearly wrong that you have permission to leave. It starts when you stop translating their behavior generously. You used to do that without thinking. They'd forget to text back, and you'd assume they got busy. They'd make plans without checking with you first, and you'd tell yourself they were being spontaneous. They'd say something dismissive, and you'd soften it in your mind, find the better version of what they meant. That translation, that internal advocacy you did for them, it was invisible. Until it stopped. And once it stops, you start collecting evidence instead. Not consciously. You're not building a case or planning an exit. But your brain shifts into a different mode. Every small thing that would have dissolved before now stays. They cancel plans last minute, and instead of understanding, you remember the other 3 times. They don't ask about your day, and you notice that they used to. They make a joke at your expense, and it doesn't feel playful anymore. It feels like data. This is where it actually ends. Not later. Here. Because what's happening is you're falling out of the story you've been telling yourself about who they are. And humans, we can't stay in relationships with people once the story breaks. We stay in relationships with our narrative about the person, the version we've decided they are. And when that version stops matching what we're experiencing, something splits. You keep showing up to the relationship. You're still there physically, still texting, still saying I love you before bed. But internally, you've started leaving. You're watching them now instead of being with them. And they can feel it, even if they can't name it. They just know something's off. You're quieter maybe, or you're agreeable in a way that feels hollow. You stopped fighting about things because you stopped caring enough to fight. And this creates its own cycle. Because when you pull back emotionally, they feel it. And people respond to being felt less in predictable ways. They either chase harder, which pushes you further away because now it feels desperate. Or they match your distance, which confirms what you already suspected, that they didn't care as much as they said. Either way, the gap widens. I've seen this pattern repeat across different types of people. The high achievers who break up because they realize their partner isn't ambitious enough. The creatives who leave because they feel misunderstood. The people who end things because of political differences or lifestyle incompatibilities or different ideas about the future. And here's what's strange. The stated reason is almost never the actual reason. The actual reason is usually something that happened 6 months earlier. Something tiny, a moment where they needed you to show up in a specific way, and you didn't. Or you needed them to, and they couldn't. And neither of you said anything, because it seemed too small to mention. But it changed the temperature. Maybe you were excited about something at work, and when you told them, they looked at their phone while you were talking. Just for a second, and you told yourself it didn't matter, but some part of you filed it away. Or maybe you were going through something difficult, and they gave you advice when what you needed was just to be held. And you didn't correct them because you didn't want to seem needy. But you felt the gap between what you needed and what they offered. And that gap, it doesn't close on its own. It grows, because the thing about unspoken disappointments is they don't disappear. They compress, they turn into something harder. And eventually, you're not even disappointed about the specific thing anymore. You're disappointed about the pattern, about what it means, about who they've revealed themselves to be in these small, unglamorous moments. And this is why the breakup conversation, when it finally happens, often feels so disconnected from reality. Because one person brings up something recent, something that feels manageable, and the other person is thinking about 27 accumulated moments that never got addressed. So they're having 2 completely different conversations. One person thinks this is fixable. The other person has already been grieving for months. I've noticed the grieving happens in stages, but not the ones people talk about. It's more mechanical than that. First, you grieve the version of them you thought they were. The person you met. The one who stayed up with you talking about nothing and made it feel like everything. You grieve that person even though they're still standing right in front of you. Then you grieve the future you'd imagined. Not the big things necessarily. Not the wedding or the house or the kids, though sometimes those too. But the small future. The inside jokes you'd planned to run into the ground. The trips you'd vaguely talked about. The way you thought you'd grow old together, sitting on some porch somewhere, still making each other laugh. And then, and this is the part that takes longest, you grieve the version of yourself you were with them. Because you became someone specific in that relationship. You had rhythms and roles and ways of being that only existed in that context. And when the relationship ends, that version of you ends too. Even if you're the one leaving. Even if you wanted it to end. You still lose that self. Most people don't expect that part. They think they're just losing the other person. But you're also losing the you that existed in relation to them. The Chinese letter a te jokes that won't land anymore. The references no one else will get. The shorthand you developed. It dies with the relationship. And maybe this is why people stay longer than they should. Not because they still love the person, though sometimes they do. But because leaving means killing off a version of themselves. And that feels violent in a way that's hard to explain to people who haven't done it. So you stay in this strange liminal space. Not quite in it, not quite out, going through the motions, having the same circular arguments, making up and breaking down and making up again. And each time you cycle through, you're hoping something will click back into place. That you'll feel it again, whatever it was you felt before. But here's what I've seen. Once you've started spectating your own relationship, once you've moved from participant to observer, it almost never reverses. Because you can't unsee patterns once you've seen them. You can't unhear the tone they use when they are irritated. You can't unfeel the way they pull away when you try to talk about something real. The information has been collected. The story has shifted. And your nervous system, it's already preparing for the exit even if your mind isn't ready yet. This is why the physical breakup often feels anticlimactic. Because the real ending already happened. Weeks ago, months ago, in some unremarkable moment that neither of you marked as significant. Maybe it was a Tuesday. Maybe you were both tired. Maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. But something closed, some door, and everything after that was just the slow work of making it official. I've noticed people often fixate on who ended it, who said the words first, as if that determines who wanted it more. But that's not how it works. Usually, one person just has a higher tolerance for ambiguity. They can sit in the discomfort longer. They can pretend more effectively. So the other person breaks first, says it out loud, and then gets blamed for ending something that was already over. And the person who got broken up with, they often spend months analyzing what went wrong. Replaying conversations, looking for the moment it changed, wondering if they'd said something different, done something better, whether it would have mattered. And sometimes it would have. Sometimes there was a specific moment where a different response would have altered the trajectory. But most of the time, by the point they are analyzing it, it's already too late. The pattern was set. The translation stopped. The story broke. And no amount of forensic analysis will resurrect something that died from accumulated neglect. Because that's what most breakups are. Not dramatic betrayals, just slow erosion. Two people who stop choosing each other in the small moments. Who let resentment build in the gaps where communication should have been. Who prioritized comfort over honesty until comfort became resentment and honesty became impossible. And the strangest part is how normal it looks from the outside. Your friends don't see it. Your family doesn't know. You're still posting photos together, still showing up to events as a unit, still performing the relationship. But inside you've both gone quiet. You're coexisting, coordinating logistics, splitting bills, but you're not actually together anymore. You're just two people who haven't admitted it yet. I've seen this phase last years. Literally years. People who know it's over but can't seem to execute the ending. And it's not always about fear, though sometimes it is. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of admitting failure. But sometimes it's more practical than that. The lease doesn't end for 8 months, or you have a trip planned, or you're in a wedding party together, or it just feels too complicated to untangle right now. So you wait, and the relationship becomes this thing you're both trapped in. This container that used to hold love, but now just holds obligation. And every day you don't leave, it gets harder to leave. Because now you have to justify why you stayed so long. Now the conversation is more complicated. Now there's more to explain. And this is where people start manufacturing reasons. They need the other person to do something bad enough to justify leaving. So they start picking fights, or they withdraw completely, hoping the other person will get fed up and end it. Or they create situations where betrayal becomes more likely. Not consciously, but they're engineering an exit that feels legitimate. Because we need our breakups to make sense. We need a story we can tell ourselves and others. They cheated is a story. We wanted different things is a story. But I just stopped feeling it, and I don't know exactly why, doesn't feel like enough. Even though it's often the most honest answer. So we construct better narratives. We find the incompatibilities that were always there, and decide they are suddenly deal breakers. We rewrite history a little, make the bad times worse in our memory, minimize the good times, build a case that makes leaving feel necessary instead of chosen. And maybe this is adaptive. Maybe we need these stories to move forward. Because if we admitted that most relationships don't end for grand reasons, that they just kind of fade out when people stop maintaining them, that would mean we have to take responsibility for the entropy. We'd have to admit we let it die, that we could have watered it and didn't, that we chose other things instead. And that's heavier somehow than being wronged, than being cheated on or lied to, or fundamentally incompatible. Those things happen to you. But entropy, that's something you participate in. That's collaborative failure. I've seen people stay in touch after breakups that ended from entropy. They're friendly. They wish each other well. They might even meet up sometimes. Because there's no wound to heal from. No villain. Just two people who slowly became strangers to each other and eventually made it official. But I've also seen those same people struggle more with the breakup than people who ended things dramatically. Because there's no narrative momentum, no clean break, no anger to carry you through, just this quiet grief for something that faded without permission. And years later, they'll still wonder sometimes, not whether they should get back together, but whether they gave up too easily, whether they could have tried harder, whether the problem was the relationship or just the fact that they didn't fight for it. And here's the thing I've noticed. The answer doesn't actually matter. Because even if they could have saved it, even if more effort would have changed things, they didn't give that effort. And that in itself is information, not about their capacity for love, but about what that specific relationship brought out in them. Because some relationships make you want to try. They make effort feel natural. And some relationships, they drain you in ways you don't notice until you're out of them. You're always managing their moods or editing yourself or trying to be smaller or bigger than you are. And you don't realize how exhausting it is until it stops. So when people ask whether they should have tried harder, what they are really asking is whether they failed. Whether they are the kind of person who gives up. And the answer is more complicated than yes or no. Because staying in something that's not working isn't virtuous. And leaving something that could have worked with more effort isn't cowardice. It's just choice, based on incomplete information. In a moment when you were tired or scared or hurting or just done. And the relationship ends. Not when someone moves out or changes their relationship status or divides up the furniture. It ends when you stop defending them in your head. When you stop translating their behavior generously. When the story you've been telling yourself about who they are stops matching what you're experiencing. Everything after that is just paperwork. The actual ending, the real one, it already happened. In some small moment, neither of you were paying attention to. A Tuesday afternoon maybe. You were both tired. Nothing dramatic occurred. But something shifted. Some internal door closed. And you've been living in the aftermath ever since. Just waiting for the words to catch up to the reality. And when they finally do, when someone finally says it out loud, it feels both devastating and relieving. Because it's over, really over, not just emotionally, but officially. And now you can stop pretending, stop performing, stop hoping it'll click back into place. You can grieve properly now, not in secret, not while still sleeping next to them, but openly, alone, without having to manage their feelings while processing your own. And maybe that's why it takes so long sometimes. Why people stay months or years past the internal ending. Because grief postponed is easier than grief experienced. And as long as you're still together, you can tell yourself it might still work out. You can live in maybe. And maybe, uncomfortable as it is, feels safer than definitely not. But eventually, the weight of maybe becomes heavier than the fear of no. And someone breaks, says the thing, starts the conversation that ends it. And the breakup happens, finally, after all those months of it being over without being over. And you're both sad, even the person who initiated it. Because ending something you once wanted is sad even when it's right. Even when it's necessary. Even when you're relieved. You can hold all of it at once. The sadness and the relief. The grief and the hope. The love for who they were, and the acceptance that it wasn't enough to keep you. Most people don't expect that part. They think breakups are binary. You're either heartbroken or you're fine. You either regret it or you don't. But it's more textured than that. You can miss someone and not want them back. You can love someone and know you can't be with them. You can grieve a relationship and still know leaving was right. And time does something strange to it. Years later, you'll think about them occasionally. Not with longing usually. Just with this soft curiosity. Wondering who they became. Whether they're happy. Whether they think about you too sometimes. And you'll remember the good parts more clearly than the bad. The reasons you left will fade a little. And you'll be tempted to romanticize it. To think maybe you were wrong. Maybe you gave up on something real. But if you're honest, you'll remember that you stopped defending them in your head. You'll remember the distance, the way you became a spectator in your own relationship. And you'll know that whatever you had, it ended long before you said the words. The conversation was just confirmation of something you both already knew.